And this is why. This is what our debt numbers look like at this moment. Now, these are the numbers that we've gotten from the Central Bank of Kenya. As at March 2024, this is the amount of our total public debt. It stands at 10.398 trillion. It's a little less now compared to last year, which was at around 11 trillion. And that's because the Kenya shilling is performing a little better now than it was 6 months ago. Remember, all our debt is dollar denominated. Now, out of this 10.398 trillion shillings, this is what we owe in terms of domestic debt, 5.253 trillion. And in terms of the external debt of that total 10.398, it is 5.163 trillion shillings. So all of this, of course, comes to that 10.398 we're talking about. Now, exactly who do we owe? Let me give you some figures, and these are accurate as at the end of last year. These are just some of the people that we owe, but perhaps the more important, and that'll give our point. World Bank and IMF, as of last year, 2.21 trillion. These two are important. Eurobond was at 1.1 trillion. China, we owe 9.39 billion. These numbers have no doubt, increased in the last 6 months. Now, I want to explain something here a little bit, because you see, this debt is essentially to pay these debts. That is because at some point in our country, we did what is called rebasing of our economy. So that meant that we couldn't get more affordable or concessional loans from multilateral lenders. So now we go for commercial loans, which are more expensive and double-digit. Eurobond, we've had 3 of those, I believe. China, for all the big, shiny infrastructure projects that we want, including what perhaps I like to call the original sin, the SGR, whose rate was inflated close to 3 times. The value for money is yet another matter altogether. Now, it is important to note that the loans that we get from the World Bank and others are more concessionary. So what does that mean? Essentially, we're talking about having fairer interest rates, sometimes at about 1.75%, and they are for a 35-year period with a 10-year grace period. The reason you go to them is because things are a little tight around here. That's fine. That's some good math right there. However, because they're coming in to bail you out from these 2 and other expensive loans, they come with conditions. Now, here are some of the conditions that you get from the World Bank, and these are just a few. So they've looked at our public state-owned enterprises. These are parastatals, public universities, and they have noted many of them are not a going concern. In fact, most of them draw from the budget as opposed to, in fact, putting money in the budget. So one of the conditions they have there is rationalizing state-owned enterprises, possibly privatizing them and floating them on the stock exchange. Now, in light of this, the government-owned enterprises bill has been launched. It was published by Treasury. The point of this is to see 40 parastatals moved to national treasury. All right. Now, that is an IMF-backed bill. And these are such like Kenya Power and many others. Those are the ones that are underperforming. So under National Treasury, they believe that they would have a closer eye on the amount that we're seeing. Now, we've also heard proposals of privatizing them. 349 state-owned enterprises that we have in the country, out of which only about 70% are actually remitting money to the exchequer. You remember hearing the president saying that some of these would be listed at the Nairobi Stock Exchange, essentially privatizing them. These are the ones that depend solely on state funding, solely on, therefore, your taxes. Now, another one was to operationalize this one. It's called the Treasury Single Account. So, in simple terms, government has bank accounts all over, so why not put that money collectively in one instead of paying charges to all of those? Also, from there, you get to monitor the amount of money that is coming in. Here is another one for tertiary institutions. Many of our public universities not doing well financially, even with the introduction of private programs, privately funded programs. So now one of the IMF conditions is to introduce performance-based financing for these tertiary institutions. In other words, are they making money? Then we give them more. But those are some of the issues here. Now, I also want to talk about some other conditions that have been brought up by the IMF, particularly with a new fund that we got just this month. It's called the Resilience and Sustainability Facility. Now, that is to help us support the fight against climate change. Now, there is a condition there with that, and it includes carbon taxation. One of the conditions is to develop a roadmap towards the adoption of carbon taxation. The other one is, of course, to ensure that we have climate considerations in the budget to enhance things like early warning systems. Now, there's also a big one here in terms of wage bill consolidation. Now, this one is to ensure that we have a robust payroll management policy, and that is to plug leakages as well as to rationalize allowances, which is one of the areas that we keep talking about in terms of recurrent expenditure. The last one here that I will talk about is removing subsidies. You will remember this right when this new administration came into power, and it is talking about the fact that these subsidies should not be there. And is a revenue collection mechanism. In fact, just recently, when these were reinstated for a while, because remember the price of fuel went above 200 shillings, IMF were not too pleased with that. They said in one of their reviews that the lengthy process in forming the task force and publication of that decision to remove the subsidies resulted in a delayed implementation of the structural benchmark. So all this money is great, but it comes with conditions, including one of revenue mobilization. You remember, in fact, when we doubled taxation, VAT on fuel from 8% back to 16%, that was a condition of IMF. So it would seem we're in a bit of a tough space at the moment. So now I'd like to ask this question to you, Diana. It looks like we're in a bit of a very tight spot. We owe money. We are borrowing from Peter essentially to pay Paul. Yes. And Peter has some very strict conditions, some of which include excess taxation. And so many questions from Kenyans would be, is this the IMF running our taxation policy? And is this why we seem to be, in a tough spot?